Hello, my friends. So excited to be here today with the amazing Nichole Lee. Say hello, Nichole.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Sherry. How are you today?
I'm good. Good. Thank you so much for being here. I've been following you on Instagram and I love how you talk about yourself as a identity
hmm
and life transition coach. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about just a quick intro to who you are,
Okay.
what you do, and then, this is Bosses with Baggage. So we're going to get
Okay.
right into the baggage.
That sounds good. So we'll start with the intro and then go straight into the baggage. Yes. So as you mentioned, I am an identity and life transition coach. And basically what that means is that typically when we go through life, there are things that can transpire that are pretty significant, right? And we consider those life transitions. So whether it's a career change, whether it's a relationship change, whether it's tied to even your spirituality and shifts and beliefs and things of that nature. But those are major transitions in our lives, and many times, or a loss of a loved one, which I will share because that really became a major life transition for me. That in the midst of that, many times we're asking not only what we do or how do we get through it, it is who am I? And so, as I have learned through my own experience and as well as with clients, is it really is helping the transition, but it's also helping redefine who you are, what you want in life, and being able to create that. So that's what I do. I help people through their navigating their life transition, transforming into the new them, and transcending into new heights of experiences and things that they want to have occur in their life.
Oh, that's awesome and so important and applicable to anybody listening to this podcast, right? Because
hmm
we are all about showing up in our lives and in our business in a very authentic way. But many times people don't because they've gone through these, big life transitions and it's
Yep.
left some trauma, it's left some scars, and they don't know how to show up in a way that feels authentic to them but that
Yeah.
doesn't bring in all of the fear that a lot of those transitions can bring with you, right?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so tell us a little bit about the transitions that have really shaped you and
hmm
led you to wanting to do this work. Because I imagine you don't get to a place where you become a coach like this if you haven't gone through something like that on your own.
Correct.
So tell us the story.
Yes, correct. And you're so right because actually, when I first started, I was kind of seen as just a life coach. And then I evolved in a self love coach because there was a personal aspect, and then got to the identity and life transition coach. And really, my own experience and major life transition that took me there was the loss of my mom. So, my mother became ill in 2018, had a rapid decline. She was diagnosed with cancer. I was her caretaker, and once she passed, and people say this, right, when they lose a loved one, it's not the same. Particularly for me, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, I could sense and feel something was not going to be the same, right? And navigating that new normal took me into a place that I could not operate and function in the world that I was in. I had been in business management consulting for 20 years. I was quote unquote deemed successful at what I do, good at what I do, but I could not go back into that world, Sherry, the same way. I knew that some of that was tied to grief, but I also knew that there was an activation that transpired with my mother passing that did bring me into asking the questions: who am I? Is this really what I want? Who am I living for? Is it the titles, the labels, the expectations that other people have on my life? Am I being true and authentic to myself and even other people and how I'm showing up? And the answer became no to a lot of those questions. And through that process, over 2 years or so, I actually had started meditation practice, more of a deep meditation practice. And my mother came to me in a meditation and she told me to quit my job. So, my transition was truly a spiritual one. So, though I was having, visceral responses physically in my body and mentally, there was a spiritual activation that transpired that woke up something in me that said, this is what I have to do. And so, within, I believe, a couple weeks, it's been a while, that I actually said, I went to my manager and said, I'm leaving. and I ended up staying on to consult, but I officially became a non-employed, unemployed technically, the summer of 2020, and then took the full leap of faith at the beginning of 2021. And so I went on a discovery journey. I discovered a lot about myself, some things that I wasn't too happy right about myself. And we'll talk about some of the baggage elements of that. But that led me to where I am today. And I consider myself a soulpreneur as a result. And a soulpreneur, in my eyes, is someone that knows that they are in their mission and vision and purpose, that their soul is divinely assigned to do this type of work. So that's what led me to where I am now.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the word. I think the word you use is activation. Is
Mm-hmm.
that talking? We had a little bit of a conversation before we went on air about this idea of dark night of the soul, and you were
Mm-hmm.
sharing that you like to call it more of like an activation. Like this was an
Mm-hmm.
activation moment as opposed to
Yeah.
something that was super dark. And I love that idea of out of whatever it is that's happening, there
Mm-hmm.
is this spark, right? There is this
Yes.
catalyst for change. And I
Yes.
just love the way you describe it that way.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and as we were talking, there's so many different terms and processes and frameworks and things that work for individuals. That's what's so beautiful about us, right? We have variety and there's different ways that we connect and resonate. And I found on my journey that leveraging words that created more light, more excitement, more energy towards exploration were things that I found that helped me, and why I also use them with clients. And it's mostly because, as we know, many of those words sometimes are connected with just such painful experiences or memories or even fear of going into those spaces, right? So, um, again, right, there's not a one size fits all, and that's what's so beautiful, is there are all these different ways that we can heal and go through our journeys. And just in my case, that's what I found to be helpful for me.
Yeah, I love that. And the other thing you were talking about was this difference between, you had the mental kind of torment, or however you want to
Yeah.
talk about it, when your mom passed, and then there were physical impacts of that as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? We know that those are connected, but there's also a spiritual side to it, right? There is always that triad of mind, body, and soul. And I
Yes.
think I love the term you use of soulpreneur, and I've used that one too, where it's this idea of like it all comes together, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna create a life and a business that harmonizes all three of those,
Yes.
despite what's happened to us, right? Despite
Yes.
everything else, that we're gonna use that as the catalyst to bring those things together.
Yes, and that's so beautiful too, because I think even what I experience perhaps more from a societal perspective is to have a disconnection from those. And I think when you create that level of interconnectedness, it also creates a greater sense of peace and harmony in the direction you're going. I feel like many times people are fighting between those three elements of themselves and trying to figure out which one is going to lead, right? And when you can find them in harmony with each other, that's when the alignment, that's when the excitement, that's where I found my confidence and courage really started to ignite and expand, because there was some cohesiveness to what that looked like for me. So I love that you said that. And I think that the more we go on that journey of exploring how they work together, the mind, the body, the spirit, the heart, I feel that more people will be in a better place of the direction they're going and be able to be more resilient in dealing with the challenges that are naturally part of this human experience.
And I think there is a an idea, an incorrect idea in our society, that just because you're a soulpreneur and you're thinking about spirit and, mind body connection and all the woo woo kind of things, that you can't be successful.
Yes.
And I was watching a TED talk last night, and someone was talking about, it's actually the opposite, right? Our
Mm.
brain needs dopamine to
Mhm.
think and to
Mhm.
learn, but it only gets dopamine when we're happy. And so we have to be happy first and feel fulfilled first before we are able to learn what we need to learn to be successful. where
Mm-hmm.
the opposite in our society is true, or the thought is that it's the opposite, which is if I'm successful, then I'll be happy. But you're never
Mm-hmm.
successful because you're always moving that goalpost, right? And so I think if we can flip that narrative to say, I'm going to live in an alignment with these, both mind, body, and soul,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to create a sense of happiness in me. And therefore, I will be able to be successful. But without that as my foundation, the success can't come.
Yes, and what it brings me back to is the being versus the doing. And this goes back to the identity piece, right? That yes, so much of society is around what you're doing or the titles or the labels of what you've acquired versus who you are. And when you live based on those expectations of the titles, the labels, the doing the things, then you're constantly feeling that you have to get more of that, right? When you start to recenter and realign with self, you start to recognize that all that you need is inside of you, and those things are supporting you. You have a different perspective about the outside world, right? Of who's really running the show. And that was what I had to learn is I literally came to epiphany where I said, wow, I'm not even the main character in my own movie, right? I am an actor that's been given multiple scripts, and I am acting out somebody else's life. Now wonder I'm stressed. Now wonder I don't feel worthy. Now wonder I have anxious moments. Now wonder I'm have codependencies, all the things, right? All the symptoms, but the root was that I did not really know who I was, and I was not the main character of my own story in my own life, my own movie.
How did you go through that process? And I imagine that it's therefore the same process you use with your clients. So
Mhm.
you quit your job, and your mother comes to you and says, quit your job. You quit your job. There's
Mhm.
a journey there of self-exploration, and at some point a catalyst, I imagine, a catalyst or a spark of, I can use this experience to help others. So walk us through that
Mhm.
journey.
Yeah, so originally when I took the leap, because I had been certified already as a coach, there was some opportunity to start doing some business, but that wasn't the focus, right? To your point, it was rest. I didn't know what rest really was until because I was in consulting. I traveled what 13, 15 of the 20 years. I'm a million miler. Like I'm the person that they make the jokes about when it comes to consulting, being on planes, and I say in other people's beds more than my own, right? Because you're in these hotels. And so going through that process of deprogramming of rest and personal time and space, it actually opened up some wounds of how unhappy I actually was and how dependent I was on that validation of success and performance and all these things. So part of it was actually seeking out more support. I had spiritual teachers, I had mentors, I had therapists, and then I got really deep into just learning more. And part of the reason why I did obtain so many certifications, it was helping me learn more about myself, and I started applying those things to myself, which then ended up right being able to serve clients in that way. So becoming a certified health coach helped me recognize the interconnectedness of, like we say, the way we feel, the food we eat, the movement of our bodies, from that perspective, going into energy healing and understanding more of our energy centers and our body intelligence, and me now leveraging that to help heal myself. Everything from meditation to hypnotherapy. So that's really what happened as I started shifting into almost experimentation, right? I became my own lab rat and started just leveraging all of these different things. And as I started doing that and releasing some of the things that did not serve me, that were not me, it created more of a capacity to then work on some other areas of my life and then start to expand in my business as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how sometimes being selfish is the way that we can then serve. We have to
Mhm.
spend the time on ourselves first. I think that's
Yes.
another way that sometimes the script needs to be reversed, where we're like, go, 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 output, 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 as opposed to rest, reflect, center, ground,
Yes.
right? We
So
never do
true.
that. We don't take time to do it. I think for many of us, COVID, and for me, COVID
Mhm.
was the great reset because it
Mm.
forced me to be at home, right? And
Mm.
while I was still working remotely,
Mhm.
the 3 hours I was spending in the car every day, the extra time I was spending, putting on the suit and all the things that I didn't now need to do in the office, it opened up some space. It opened up enough space for me to say, oh, is this what I really want? Right? Because we're so busy, we
Mhm.
never take any space to reflect back.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. COVID was actually more challenging because I took the leap and separated from a world that I knew that was my safety net in a sense. So that's what was interesting is because it created such an isolation, right? I no longer was in consulting. I wasn't on calls for 12 to 14 hours connecting with people. I lived by myself. I was in a relationship, but I was still living by myself. So I had separated myself from something that kept me going. um, and so when I think back to that, I'm grateful, but it is interesting how that created a different type of rest because I was no longer plugged in. So I was forced to sit with myself in in an even deeper way. And the thing that is interesting, when we talk about success, and you were talking about just taking that time, me taking a leap of faith and not having a plan in most people's eyes is stupid, right? That's irresponsible. That's not what you do. That's impulsive. So me working through that perception of what I was doing, and then on top of that saying that I'm not going to have a goal to make the same money that I was making. I'm actually going to rest, heal, discover, explore, was very foreign from everything I had done prior to that. Everything was having a system, having a plan, being an expert, proving yourself, making sure that if you're leaving, that it needs to be exactly so that when you go into rooms, you can express yourself in that way. And that was the part that I really had to work through, to be comfortable to say, no, I'm not making the same money that I did, but I'm choosing to heal and rest. I'm choosing to fail, make mistakes, and reevaluate. That was huge for me. And that really, when you talk about helping clients, I think that was one of the more profound areas that I can share, is because many times people aren't comfortable taking the leap because of some of those types of things, from financial perceptions of what other people will say, boundaries that have to be set, all of those things. And I had gone through that. So I can share my story and I can be an example of how it can work when you're committed to it. I had to commit to that story for myself before anybody else would honor and respect it.
And I love that idea of committing to rest,
Mhm.
committing to not committing.
Yes. Yes, committing to the doing being the not doing. Yes, for
Right.
sure.
Right.
Yep.
Because that was your goal, right? In some
Mhm.
ways, I mean, that was the action plan. The action plan is I'm not going to take action and I'm going to center and I'm going to meditate every day and I'm going to do all the things, right?
Yep.
And wait for some level of divine guidance on what's next. And
Mhm.
then I'll create a plan, right? I mean, and nothing happens without being purposeful and taking purposeful action and
Mhm.
consistent purposeful action. But we need to ground first, right? So when
Mhm.
I do marketing plans with people, the first step is rooting.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
let's really root in, why are you doing this? What's your
Mhm.
superpower? What makes you excited? What's your vision? What's your mission? What's your values? And we
Mhm.
start there because everything has to be built off that foundation. Because if you're not
Mhm.
grounded, the rest, it's like building a house of cards, right? It's all
Mhm.
just going to
The
fall down.
foundation
You
is
have
not
to have
there.
it.
Yep. That foundation is so important. And it's interesting too that now, in reflection, though I had committed to the rest and things, one of the things that I did recognize, I was still very dependent on other people validating me. So I sought out all kinds of coaches, right? Though my certifications will also tie to experimentation, I had to check myself on, like, do you need another certification? Do you need, because the world I came from, the more that you show your expertise in these ways, having coaches affirm me in certain ways, or telling me how I should show up, because you mentioned that too, the woo versus strategy. I mean, I had that in the beginning, that no one's going to be comfortable with your spiritual side. You have 20 years of consulting experience. We need to start with you showing your intellect and your strategy and all these things. And it was not working for me. It did not feel good. I went with it, right? And then I decided to go kind of on the love side because that felt safe, but that still wasn't it. And so I evolved in finding what you're talking, this beautiful harmony that both can exist and they're absolutely necessary. And that's what brought me to where I am today. But I had to go through checking myself to realize how much I was investing in other people, once again, telling me who I should be, how I should show up, um, and the way that I should navigate the world. And the work you do is so powerful and so important, because even in my journey, having individuals in your space that really started asking me, who are you? Right? If you were to show up in the world as you and your brand was walking down the street, right, what would that look like? And that's where I started finding disconnects between how I was showing up and how I would express that. So it's just very fascinating when you get to a level of awareness of where you're seeing the disconnects, of how you can and break through that to really get to your truth.
Yeah, because so many people get scared. They know they should be out there. They know they should be marketing their business. They know that they are the face of their business. But all these other stories about, well, you're supposed to dress like this, and you're supposed to act like this, and, well, you're not as outgoing as that person, or you're
Right.
not, right? And so, like, people say to me, even with me, people say to me all the time, they're like, yeah, but I'm not you. I'm like, I know you're not me, and you
Right. We don't want
shouldn't
you to
be
be me.
me. You don't want to be me. Like, let's talk about all the crap that I went through to get here, which is why we talk about bosses with baggage, right? Because I think we
Right.
need that. We need to share those stories, because sometimes people see us who've come to the other side and
Mhm.
are like, oh, wow, well, were just born like that. And I'm like,
Mhm.
no. But also, I have different skill sets than other people have. And so
Right.
really spending time rooting in on, what are my superpowers? What do I bring to the world that's different? And
Mhm.
not only identifying those, but then being willing to show up in the world that way. And for me, it's interesting. And I love what you were talking about, where you're like, oh, I have the strategy brain and I'm going to start there. That's very much been my business as
Mm.
well. And this podcast has been really the catalyst for me to start talking about the other components of it, because I find
Mm.
that strategy isn't enough in personal branding. It
Mhm.
has to be, you have to do the internal work as well,
Mhm.
because the people who really want to show up, they want to make a change, they want the world, they know they have something inside them that God has given them that they're ready to put out there, but fear is holding them back. You have
Mhm.
to, you can write a strategy all day long. Here's the 8 things I want you to do, and they're not going to do them. And I've seen that the last 2 years of doing
Yes,
this.
I'm laughing
I
because
write
I was that person.
Yeah, I write a million plans for people, and
Mhm.
they never get them done. And I'm like, what is really happening here? And I sit down with them like, what's happening? And they're like, I just can't. I just,
Yeah.
I don't feel worthy. I'm
Yeah.
too scared. What if people don't like me? What if my mom sees it and wants to judge me? What if my aunt sees it and thinks that, I'm being too braggy, or
Mhm.
whatever the things are that are going on in their minds. And so my hope with this podcast is that we can share our stories of, I'm scared all the time. I feel like I look like a dork all the time, right? I'm a recovering alcoholic, for God's sake. Like, whatever. Like, I was at a thing the other day. and this woman, I spoke at a networking thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I was talking to a woman afterwards, and we were talking about being married, and she was, kind of sharing some shame around being divorced. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I just got, I mentioned, oh, I just got remarried. She goes, oh, so he's your second husband. Like, how is
Mm-hmm.
that? And I'm like, oh, honey, he's my fourth and I'm his third. And so she's like, and this was so telling. She said, but you look like somebody who just has it all together. Like that you
Man,
never
oh
had any
man.
problems in your life. I'm like, honey, I've had four husbands. I have ripped apart my life many, many times. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm a recovering codependent. I'm, have been and am still sort of a mess, but I'm doing the work to put it out there, and I'm authentically a mess, but I can help other people to get through their authentic mess.
Yeah, and what is so interesting and so powerful, and we've heard it many times, don't judge a book by its cover. And it's just interesting how our unconscious bias of the covers, right? The mask gives a perception, especially if you're aesthetically appealing or, whatever that cultural, because we all know those are social norms or whatever the case is, but how you're visually showing up, people will naturally believe, right, that it's all together. And I found very similarly that I've had to be much more vulnerable and share similar things, right? The codependency, the unhealthy relationships, multiple relationships. I, especially in my personal life, when I think about the journey I have been on and recognizing how much I was not taking care of myself emotionally and physically as it relates to companionship and things of that nature, and desiring such deep validation externally in those relationships, morphing myself multiple times into what I believed they wanted and needed and all these things. And much of that came to light when my mother passed. Like, that's what's interesting, right? Because giving myself that time to reflect and start to understand certain patterns and behaviors, and being able to work through them, actually freed me from the shame and guilt, right? Because I then recognized that that was part of my story. It was necessary. How can I relate and connect with other people in such a deep, profound way to create a level of safety and trust if I had not gone through those things? And that's been
Absolutely.
the part for me that has literally freed me, right, from those expectations and the alignment that was my purpose. And the other thing that's very interesting that you shared is that foundation and that root of why we don't move, why we are stuck, why we do get overwhelmed, is recognizing elements of trauma and belief systems and programming and conditioning that have actually wired us to operate a certain way, right? So when someone is saying their perception of their mother or their aunt or their coworker, that comes from some belief system and certain things that have transpired in someone's life that they have evidence to it. Because I think that's the part that sometimes is lost in the process. There is evidence for that person that what they're believing about the unknown to be is true. It may not show up in the same way, but there is a correlation. So, me showing up on social media and being afraid that I'm going to be judged means there's been judgment in my life through other people. And it was more than likely from people that I cared what they thought, that it is now creating an emotional and visceral response in me that I don't want I don't want more of that. Right. So to your point, part of that work is understanding. And I love the book, What Happened to You with Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Perry, is the more we shift to what happened to you versus what's wrong with you, the more we can start to understand the things that have happened in our lives and how it's impacting how we're showing up. So I just love that you mentioned that, because that foundation and us digging to the root is so important. And I believe much in our society, as I say, we look at the fruit, right? We look at the leaves, we look at the symptoms, but we don't really look at the root, what's foundationally creating some of these challenges that we all experience, and then being able to have the courage to face them as a result.
Yeah, that last part's really important because I find that I would say only about 25% of my clients where
Hmm.
we build a plan and we'll say, okay, go, and then they don't execute, and you realize that there's some fear happening there, and you're like, okay,
Hmm.
well, let's unpack that.
Hmm.
What is this? Where is this coming from? Man, they don't want to talk about it. Right? They're
Mm-mm.
not ready. They're not ready to face it.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because I think for so many of us, we don't realize
Hmm.
that having a personal brand or starting a business where we're going to be the face is going to bring up all that stuff.
It brought up, Sherry, they brought up all the stuff. I mean, that's why I say the work you do, I have such a different appreciation for the work with me taking the leap, and it being a mirror, right? It really served as a mirror for me to look at myself and look at whether I was aligned, unaligned, disconnected, like you say, my fears, elements of trauma that came up for me to get to a point of getting comfortable with who I was so that I could show up the way that I desired, and to get out of this once again, the mask. Like, I still find that there's sometimes elements that are pushed that, once again, I go back to the aesthetic or showing certain things or giving a perception of that is actually going to have your business expand. And that may be the case. For me, though, that was very uncomfortable, right? For me to quote unquote become successful or have financial gain, but me not be aligned to who I was and not serving the people that I felt I was called to, wasn't going to feel good in my spirit. So I had to take the choice to take a financial hit to get to that place, that then when I continue to have all these amazing things that are happening to me now was as a result of me being aligned in my truth. Right. So I did take the hit. I do know what it feels like not to have the money flowing. I also, like you mentioned, committed to getting myself in order so that I could be in that alignment and not have to reevaluate myself or not be comfortable with the outcomes as a result of that.
And it requires ongoing commitment. It's not, it's
Yes.
like losing weight, right? There's generally
Never
a
ending.
big process at the beginning,
Mhm.
but it's a daily practice, right? Like I got sober 7 years ago, and
Mm.
I still go to meetings
Mhm.
regularly. I talk to another alcoholic every day. I journal every single day. I pray every single day. I still have to do the habits and the
Mhm.
actions that someone who is living that kind of authentic spiritual life
Mhm.
takes on a daily basis.
Yes, and to your point, it's just like with life, it never ends, right? And so I think what I've also recognized too is what that practice looks like, what that support looks like is going to evolve. And as long as there is an intention and commitment to ensuring that that's part of the process, that is the key. Um, and I've also found with myself is I give myself a lot of grace. I did not give myself a lot of grace in the past. So if I am not consistent, if I deviate from the plan, if I recognize that I maybe should have moved in a different direction, I honor myself in that. And I recognize that it's a new opportunity, a new time, and new space to start over again. And I think that's the other part is literally, it may sound cliche, but every day is a new day. So if I can recognize that and give myself grace and compassion, I'm more excited to start over. The more judgment I place on myself about it, the less excited I am to go back in there, right? And rediscover or re-explore different parts of myself or even my business for that matter.
Yeah. God, I feel like I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to ask you something that I
Yes.
that I ask all of my guests,
Okay.
which is, if someone is going through that moment right now, right?
Hmm.
And they're I have a lot of people who talk to me about crying on the bathroom floor, and they're having that moment where they know that there's a line in the sand. Life is never going to be the same as it was before. What advice would you give to them as they're laying there on that bathroom floor?
The same advice I gave to myself is to honor it. I think that many times, in my experience, is that there's something wrong with being in that moment, that it will never be the same. And I think honoring what comes with that, whether that's grief, whether that's anger, whether that's resentment, whether that's whatever the emotions are that are surfacing at that point, they're real in that moment. And I think giving yourself that time and space to express that, to go through the grieving process, because many times we think of grief tied to loved ones. Grief is anytime there's an element of loss, right? So even with your situation, even though removing yourself from alcoholism has a benefit and there's beauty in that, there's still a separation from an element of your identity, that there was something, whether there's even connection to people that you can no longer be connected to, environments, right? That there's still a grieving process that can occur along with the excitement of the new space and journey that occurs. So that's the first thing I would say. The second that I would say as well is what I find is many times we feel we're alone, right? That we're the only ones. And so in that time and space, seeking out or considering someone that's in your circle that you can connect to, that you can share your story, how you're feeling, if that is having to go external to, say, a therapist or whatever that looks like. Because in those moments, it is very helpful to recognize that some of the things you're going through are natural and you aren't alone. Yes, your unique experiences are unique. There are elements of your story, though, and that's part of the reason, like with this podcast, right, and others, is that there is an element that says you aren't alone. I've been there too, and I'm here to support you. And so I think sometimes we overlook that intentionality of the type of support we need and that safety to help pick us back up again and get on a new journey that is very scary and unknown and may lead to other detachments or separations that we're afraid to have happen in those moments. And it can, because it can be so overwhelming in that moment when you are on the floor, right? Like there's so many things that are rushing at that point. So having some level of lifeline, I think, is really important as well.
I love that. Thank you so much. If people want to find you, how can they find you?
Yes. So I am on Instagram. I am Nichole Lee. That's NicholeLee. LinkedIn as well is the same. And my website is nicholelee.love, Love. You can connect to all the things with me. Send me a message. Happy to connect with anyone. If you have any questions, is there any way I can serve you or support you? I would love to just stay connected.
I love this. I've loved our conversation. Like I said earlier, I think we could sit here and talk all day. Maybe I'll have to come back.
I would love to. And I would just love, there's so many things that have perked up from this conversation. So I thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for all the amazing things that you're doing in the world and helping people heal and feel seen and heard and inspired. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Bosses with Baggage. We are honored that you chose to spend your precious time with us. I hope that you are feeling inspired to reframe your setbacks into your superpowers so that you can change not only your life, but the life of everyone around you. If you enjoyed today's podcast, and I sure hope you did, please subscribe, rate, and share on your favorite podcast listener. And if you have any ideas for a future guest, or you need some help growing your business, I'd love to connect with you. You can find me directly on my website, which is sherrysutton.com, SherrySutton.com. We'll see you next time.